The stagecoach rattled away and left its dust to hang in the cold. Nora Quinn stood on the warped porch with a carpetbag and a quiet face. The cottonwoods along the creek had gone the color of old brass. The wind slid through them with a dry whisper and carried a thin, urgent cry from inside the house. She pushed the door with her knuckles. It scraped. The front room held a slouching sofa, a rifle on pegs, and a clock that had stopped at some other life. From the back came the cry again, sharp as a knife on bone. Her breath clouded, then vanished. She crossed into the kitchen. The stove was ash and tin, a pot sitting cold with a skin of fat on top. A bottle lay on its side in a small lake of milk. The sour smell hooked her throat. She set her bag down and followed the sound. The nursery was more a corner with a crib. One curtain rod with no curtain, dust like frost at the window sash. The boy kicked and thrashed, face the color of a late apple, fists tight as hickory nuts. Nora set her palm to his belly and felt heat that was not yet fever. Her other hand slid under his shoulders. She lifted him in a slow arc, careful with the head. His wail broke in the middle, then returned smaller. She rested him high on her chest where the heartbeat would be a drum. "Easy, Jesse," she said, trying his name to hear how it fit the air. He hiccuped. She rocked her hips in a rhythm taught by no teacher. The floorboards answered with a soft creak. A tune found her without thinking. "O Shenandoah," under her breath, the notes low as coals. His mouth opened once more, then shut on a long sigh. Salty heat soaked through her bodice. She did not mind. She kept the tune going, a river under a river, until his fists loosened and his weight settled. Boots sounded in the hall. She turned her head. A man stood at the doorframe with shoulders squared from habit, not pride, hat in hand. Hair, too long at the neck-beard growth, shading a jaw he did not shave for anyone. His eyes were pale like water that runs under ice. "You the cook," he said. It was not a question. Nora Quinn. She kept rocking, kept the boy pressed. "I cook, I can feed him." She met his eyes. "I can nurse him." The man looked at Jessie. The look lasted, then moved to her hands, the hands that knew the weight of a baby and the weight of a skillet. His throat worked. "Cole Maddox," he said, as if the name would explain the boards and the pauses. He studied the floor a beat longer. Then "Stay." He left it there and turned away. No handshake, no welcome. The name of the place sighed in the rafters. Mesquite Ridge. The wind rose, then dropped. Nora let out the breath she had been holding without knowing. Jessie slept mouth open, lashes clumped. She eased him into the crib, smoothed the blanket, and tightened the crib slat with her fingers when it wobbled. In the kitchen, she coaxed a fire from old ash. Pine caught first, then cottonwood, then a stick of mesquite that gave off a sweet, bitter smoke. When the iron took heat, she rinsed the pot and set water for oats. She wiped the milk lake to the last rim and scrubbed the bottle until glass squeaked. When the water rolled, she shook in oats and a pinch of salt. The steam smelled of hay and mornings. She set a tin cup near the back of the stove to warm, dropped a twist of thyme into its pocket, watched the leaves uncurl. By the time the sun pushed a thin blade through the east window, the house had a small pulse. She washed Jesse's face with a rag, and warm water changed his shirt, kissed the wet crown without thinking. She plated bacon for the hands and an egg for the boss. She did not lay a setting for herself at his table. She ate standing at the window nook with her spoon and her shadow. When Cole came in, his boots spoke for him. He left a square of paper by the coffee pot. "Feed the boy at 11. Check west fence corner. Lost a calf." He went out again. The door spoke when it shut. That was the language of this house, she thought. Boards and paper. In the yard, Pike and Sawyer stamped mud and talk. Maddox hired a nursemaid. Pike's grin showed a chip like a bite taken out of a tooth. She big enough to hide a grain sack under that skirt. Sawyer rolled a smoke with clumsy fingers. "Boss needs a cook, not a mama." Nora heard because the field carries sound like a pond carries light. She kept her eyes on the stove. The bacon crackled, spoke its own language. She laid it on the platter, wiped the grease lip clean, and set a heel of cornbread beside it. Her hands were steady. Her back was a wall. That afternoon she baked again. Cornmeal and flour and a spoon of honey. A whisper of cinnamon when no one watched. The pan came out brown at the edge and gold in the heart. She wrapped a warm square in a clean cloth and set it on Cole's threshold with a note. The boy liked the smell. She did not knock. She did not wait. By morning the cloth lay folded on the floor inside the door. No crumbs, no words. That was its own reply. She stirred the oats and sang no song, just listened to the tin cup click when it settled on the stove. Rain came and did not leave. The high desert turned into a red, sucking mess. Paths became trenches. Hooves pulled loose with a wet pop. The chickens clung to their yard like sailors to rope. Jessie fussed. Nora wrapped him against her chest and stepped out with a hand to the skirt edge. The mud took her feet in at the instep, then let them go with a cold kiss. She circled the coop and mended a latch that had learned to sag. A lock of hair broke free. It stuck to her cheek. The hem of her dress darkened 3 inches up and gained weight with every step. Cole rounded the barn with a bucket that left a wet ring on his jeans where it bumped. He stopped. It was not that he had never seen a woman in the rain. It was the way she moved, rooted, but not heavy, practical, as a fence post alive in every part. "You lose your shoes?" he asked. His voice came softer than his shoulders. "No," she said. Her eyes went to her feet, muddy and clean by turns, as the muck surrendered. "The other one is too small now." I grew. It did not. He did not laugh. He looked at her face like a man measuring distance in weather. He nodded slow, then kept walking. The bucket knocked his thigh again. His boots left black wounds in the mud. That night by the fire, Nora dried the only shoe she still had. The leather had split near the heel. The stitching had begun to wander. She turned it over in her lap and patted it with the cloth as if it had gone through something difficult and come out willing. The fire snapped. On the table, a half cup left a wet circle that would turn pale when it dried. The next morning she opened the door to air out the smoke and found a pair of boots set square on the boards. Small but sturdy. Polished to a clean, honest shine, fresh oil at the welt. Inside one boot, a folded slip of paper. "These were my sisters. She never came back for them. I think they should stay." The handwriting leaned like a man learning how to talk again. Nora did not smile. She set her palm on the center of her chest and felt it rise under the pressure, then fall. She ran a finger down the seam where the boot met itself and felt the stitch catch and smoothing out. She left the note on the table and said nothing to anyone. The day had the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph someone will find later. She laced the boots and tugged the knots firm. They held like a hand. She stepped into the yard with Jessie on her hip. The boots made a sound the house seemed to recognize. Boards, porch, dirt, mud. Her shoulders set, her chin lifted. The air smelled of wet mesquite and iron. Up on the rise by the west fence, Cole stood with a hammer and a strip of wire. He leaned a hip against a split post. He watched her walk without pretending not to. He did not wave. He did not speak. He simply watched the new prints her boots pressed into the red that had taken so much from both of them. The wind changed. A quiet fell on the place that felt like something making room. Nora crossed the yard and went back inside. The last thing the morning held was the sight of 2 sets of tracks, his cut deep and straight, hers fresh and sure pointing toward the door. By noon, the red mud had skinned over and cracked like old glaze. The yard shone in places, dull in others. Inside the kitchen learned her hands. The stove held a steady breath, and the iron pot sang low with pinto beans and a ham hock that lent the room a smoke-salt comfort. Nora skimmed the foam, slid in a handful of chopped onion, and let bacon fat whisper across a skillet. She tasted with the tip of a spoon adjusted with a pinch of cumin and a fold of chile she crushed between her fingers. The air warmed enough that the window fogged and cleared with her steps. She fed the hands at the long table plates bright with beans, cornbread, and wedges of onion. Men sat barked thanks to no one in particular and ate hard. Pike cracked a joke that made his own shoulders jump. Sawyer told him to shut his mouth because his mouth was bad luck. Their talk fell into the hum of spoons on tin. Nora kept the coffee hot and poured without hovering. She set a single plate at the end near the wall. A knife and fork squared a coffee cup turned to receive. Cole walked in without sound as if the house made room for him. He set his hat on the peg and took the plate with a small nod. He ate with the same attention he gave wire and cattle counts measured and without waste. When he was done, he left a folded square by the coffee pot and left the room. The cup he had used sweated a perfect ring on the wood and a comma of brown beside it. Nora held the rag above the mark and did not wipe it yet. The folded paper said west fence far corner wire down. Be back at dusk. She turned the paper over. Nothing else. She tucked it into the corner of the mantel with 2 others and listened to the stove click as it settled. In the late afternoon, Alma Rodriguez came through the back gate with a basket and a breath that made fog in the cold. She was small and sure, her braid thick as a rope, down her back her shawl the color of sunburned sage. She set the basket on the table and lifted the cloth. Brown eggs nested in straw and a wedge of queso blanco wrapped in waxed paper. "Chickens are laying like they don't know winter is looking at them," Alma said. She glanced beyond Nora to where Jessie slept in his basket mouth, open fingers soft. He looks strong. That's good. He eats, Nora said, and he fights sleep as if he has a job to do at midnight. Alma smiled with the side of her mouth. They all do for a while. When my boy got croup at 5 months, nothing eased him except steam and a little willow. She tapped the side of her own throat, remembering. I keep a jar of bark around. The taste is mean, but it helps. Nora nodded and reached to the top shelf for an empty jar. I will trade you beans for a handful if you have it to spare. I do, Alma said. No trade, but I will take a bowl because your beans smell like someone knows what she is doing. Nora filled a bowl and passed it with a wedge of cornbread. Alma set a small cloth bag of shaved willow into Nora's palm. Their fingers touched in a way that felt like quiet agreement. Alma lingered by the basket and looked at Jessie a moment longer, then tied her shawl and went back into the cold with the easy steps of a woman who knows the shape of her yard in the dark. Nora washed the jar and labeled it with a burnt match. She moved through the kitchen with a rhythm the walls began to trust. She found a tin soapbox in the pantry and emptied it of its last crumb. Into it, she put a small roll of blue thread, a packet of needles, a thimble, and a tape that still held someone else's measurements in faint pencil. She oiled the hinge and wiped the lid. Then she walked the hall and left the box on Cole's threshold. No note this time. The box made the offering plain. Near twilight, the yard took the color out of everything. Cole came in with dust on his cuffs and a line of wire mark on his palm. The tin box sat under his boot toe. He looked at it as if it had appeared there out of a clear sky. He bent and picked it up, weighed it once, then opened it with his thumb. The tape, the thread, the needles, the small utilitarian care of it. He set it on his dresser. Later in the shed, a saddle sat under a lamp, a tear in the seat like a mouth. The stitch he put into it that night was far from pretty, but it held. He pressed the seam with his thumb and exhaled. The box fit exactly on the shelf above his oil can. Out by the west fence, the land ran open. Coyotes had chewed a path under the lowest strand. The corner post leaned. The wire sang with a high, thin complaint. Nora came up the draw with a basket over her arm and a pair of pliers in her apron. Cole, already there, had his hand on the post as if a body could talk wood into holding. His jaw worked. He had his hat pulled low and his shoulders set. Lost a calf, he said without preface. I saw the tracks by the arroyo, she said. She squinted down the line and took in the sag and the pull. Wind did half of this. Coyotes just used the door. He glanced at the pliers in her hand. You don't need to be out here. I brought wire ties, she said, and the food. You forget to eat when you stand outside and listen to fences complain. He looked at the cloth cover on her basket and the steam that rose from one corner. I can do the fence. I know, she said. I can tie a knot that will not slip. That is another thing we can do at the same time. They worked shoulder to shoulder, neither in charge, each choosing a side. She steadied the post as he tamped the earth. He stretched the wire with his hip and the hammer handle, and she slipped the ties and twisted until the steel took a new memory. The wire groaned, tightened, and came true between them. Breath misted and drifted. When they stopped, he took a cup she had filled with stew and drank it like a man drinks water after a run. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at her without looking directly, like watching the edge of the sun. I'm used to things breaking, he said at last. I'm used to making seams hold, she said. She snapped one last twist down and checked it with a tug. There. He checked her work and found nothing to correct. He nodded once, a habit more than approval. They walked back with the basket lighter and the air colder. Night came with a hard rim. From the bunkhouse, a banjo stumbled into a tune and then found it. Voices rose and dropped, laughter like pebbles thrown into a tin bucket. Nora stood at the table and polished a spoon until her face was a blur in the metal. A new square of paper waited by the stove, where she would find it as if it did not care whether she did. Jessie cries after midnight. I do not know how to make him stop. The letters leaned to the right as if pressed by weather. She read it twice and slid it under the ceramic sugar jar. She took the small wooden bell she had carved on a long evening, when the wind would not settle, tied it with a strip of cloth, and hung it from the crib rail. She set 2 fingers on the bell and sent it into a slow, steady tap that matched the way a body breathes when sleep is near. Cole watched from the doorway. Firelight made his face look less cut from one piece of wood. He opened his mouth and then shut it. She could feel the words he did not use hang between them and soften. He needs rhythm, she said, not turning, something that holds even when your arms get tired. He touched the bell with a knuckle. I can do that, he said. You can, she said. He stayed there close, but not too close, hands empty for once. The kitchen ticked as it cooled. The coyotes yipped and fell quiet. The crib gave a small wooden answer with each rise and fall of the tiny breath that came from it. Nora tied her hair back again and washed the last pan with water she had just boiled. Her sleeves slid to her elbows and showed the strong forearms that had learned their work in harder kitchens than this. Cole watched the way her hands moved. He pushed away from the jam and stepped inside the room as if stepping on a river rock. He started to say something. The air waited. A cough sounded from the crib, dry and sharp at the end. Jessie stirred and coughed again a little harder. Nora set the pan down with a small clatter and crossed the room before it settled. Cole reached the crib a heartbeat after her. They bent over the same small rise and fall and waited for the next sound. The cough came again, thin at first, then hooked at the end. Jessie's chest fluttered, stalled, then caught. Heat gathered under Nora's palm when she touched his neck. She felt the damp at his hairline and the stick of his shirt to his shoulder. In the kitchen, the kettle held a faint breath. She set it on the hot spot and turned the lid to vent the steam. "Open the window a finger," she said. "Let the wet air settle and not choke him." Cole's hand was already on the crib rail. The line through his brow cut deeper. He slid the sash up an inch. Night air came in clean and cold. The boy coughed, gagged, then reached for nothing. Nora rolled a clean cloth, dipped it in water she had cooled with a splash from the pitcher, wrung it until it no longer dripped, then folded it long. She lifted her arms for the child, not a grab, simply an offering. "Let me set the rhythm," she said. "He will follow it. We can bring him down." Cole pulled back as if a wire had zinged his skin. The muscles across his forearm bunched. He held the boy tight in a grip taught by fear and lack of sleep. "I did not hire you to be his mother," he said. The words landed heavy and stayed there. Silence closed around them. The kettle ticked once. The baby drew in a thin sound like paper tearing. Nora lowered her arms until the cloth rested in her hands like a surrendered flag. She placed it on the table beside the basin, squared the corners, and smoothed it with her palm. Her voice came steady near the ground. "I did not come here to be anyone's wife." She walked out of the room. The door shut with a careful click that neither asked forgiveness nor gave it. Cole stood over the crib with the boy hot against his shirt. He swayed because swaying was the only thing he could think to do. The small bell on the rail tapped now and then fell still. He tried the tune he had heard once in passing. The notes came crooked and short. The child coughed and started to cry. Steam rolled from the kettle and fogged the window a pale white. He turned unsure which thing to touch next when he noticed the doorway. A small wooden basin sat on the floorboard's edges, neatly shaved water inside, lifting a green scent that was not mint and not pine. A folded towel lay across it, damp to the point of perfect weight. There was no note, no words. He crouched, set Jessie against his shoulder, took the cloth, and wrung it once more. He pressed it lightly to the boy's chest and back in turns, then to the warm crown of his head. He stood with the steam, let it rise around them both, and rocked in a slower line. The cough shortened by a breath, then another. Breath found a gate and went through it. The boy's face eased from tight red to a softer color. Cole watched it shift and felt something let go in his own shoulders. He did not sit. He did not say a prayer. He touched the bell with 2 fingers and sent it into a small, steady tap. "Good," he said to the air without raising his voice. "That is better." He kept the cloth moving until the kettle gave out and the steam thinned. Then he sat finally and drew his chair up close enough that his knee touched the crib rail. The boy slept. Outside, the coyotes sounded far away and uninterested. Cole looked toward the hallway where no light showed under a certain door. "She is better than I am," he said in a voice that did not need an answer. "You picked a good woman to quiet you, boy." Dawn scraped pale along the floor. The house wore yesterday's chores like a cloak. In the parlor, dust rose where Nora's cloth went the stripe of clean widening on the bookshelf as she moved with purpose. The smell of old paper and lamp oil mixed with the last whisper of willow in the air. She lifted a stack of newspapers and brushed a fine gray from the shelf. Something small knocked against the backboard and dropped. The wooden box thudded, rolled a little, and came to rest with the lid sprung open. She froze. Inside lay a photograph with its corners worn soft. A woman looked out with a face that wanted to smile but had not finished the thought. Narrow shoulders, a throat too thin, the kind of beauty that makes people talk in low rooms. Under the photograph lay letters in a hand that had learned by writing often. The paper had gone the color of straw. Nora reached to set the lid right. Her fingers hesitated, then closed. She did not open a letter. She was closing the box when a shadow fell across the room. Cole stood in the doorway without boots, stocking feet quiet on the wood. He had not shaved. He had not slept. He did not move to take the box or hide it. He stepped in and knelt so his eyes were at her hands and not at her face. "She was not like you," he said. The quiet after that felt used to him, the kind that lives in a mouth too long. He reached past her to the photograph and lifted it so it would not bend any further. The bend was already there, a small crescent at the top, where a finger had pressed too many times. He set the photograph on his knee and looked at the woman he had been married to as if he were looking at distant weather. She was small, he said, delicate. People said that word all the time. I loved her as if the right way to love was to keep touching nothing to make room for her to be less and less. He slid a thumb under the ribbon that held the letters and teased it aside. One letter felt thinner than the rest, as if it had lost weight after being read too often. He opened it as gently as a man can. He found a line with his eye and read it in a voice that carried no flourish. I want to be loved for staying in the world, he read, not for slipping out of it. The paper trembled at its corner where his finger was. He did not seem to notice. She skipped meals because the plates got quiet when she did, he said. I did not stop her. I smiled at her cheekbones when they showed and thought I was seeing light. I learned how to hurt someone without moving. I learned how to use silence like a belt. I thought I was being tender. He went still. His hands were large and rough. A pale scar crossed his palm in a line that matched the curve of a rope burn from years back. His thumb found that line again, a familiar path he walked when he did not want to be where he was. Nora set the cloth on the shelf and put her hand on the back of his. Not a clutch, not a pitying pat, a simple, warm weight. He flinched once, the motion small as a fish in shallow water. Then he turned his hand over under hers and held on as if the board under them had tilted. His breath came in and held there at the top, then fell. He made a sound that was not laughter and not crying. It cracked down the middle and then closed up. No one touches me first, he said, almost as if explaining a fact to a child. Not for a long time. She did not tell him he had done his best. She did not tell him it was not his fault. She stood still and let the heat from the stove fill the rest of the room. The window put a square of morning on the floor and moved it an inch without anyone noticing. Somewhere, the kettle made a single cool tick. The quiet that had felt mean the night before grew softer like cloth instead of rope. He set the letter back in the box and squared the stack with the edge of his hand until the corners met. He placed the photograph on top and shut the lid. The hinge clicked. They stayed where they were and did not need to move. In the ceiling above them, a board eased and spoke in a long creak. Dust sifted down in a fine fall that caught the light like a veil. Cole's eyes lifted to the seam where ceiling met wall. He stood slow and looked toward the hallway where the attic ladder rope hung. It shifted once, as if remembering the last hand that had pulled it. He rubbed his palm on his thigh to dry it and took a step toward the rope. The box on the shelf made a small wooden sound as it settled back into its old place. The attic ladder came down with a dry rope squeal and a soft thump against the hall wall. Cole climbed into the dim where dust held the light still. He moved boxes with both hands, careful as if noise could bring back the wrong thing. When he found the bundle, he paused and set it on his knee. The cloth was wrapped in tissue gone the color of tea. He carried it down against his chest and walked to the kitchen where the stove kept a low heart. Nora stood at the counter cutting apples for a pie blade, steady peels falling in long red curls. Cole set the bundle on the table and stepped back. He opened the tissue as if afraid of tearing the past, then let the fabric show itself. The dress lay there in a soft wash of green with Time's hand on it, calico small pattern like moss underwater, a collar with a line of lace hand tacked, a hem with places where thread had loosened. It was hers, he said. His voice stayed near the table. She never wore it. Said she would when she got thin enough. Nora did not reach yet. The knife lay flat, her fingers on its handle, the apples giving off a sweet, clean smell. Her eyes moved over the dress and caught on the seam at the shoulder where someone had gone back and tried again. The stitch was larger than the first, less certain, but it held. I mended what was torn, he said. My hand is not fine. The seams are not pretty. They show where I learned. She picked up one sleeve between thumb and forefinger. The cloth warmed to her skin. The stitch pressed a faint ridge into her fingertip. She could feel the thought of the man who made it the way he had tried to meet edges with edges and let the rest be seen. A breath opened in her chest and made room for itself. You can say no, he said, and the words sounded like honest ground. Nora folded the sleeve back down, wiped her hands, and lifted the dress as if lifting a thing with a memory in it. The weight surprised her. It was not heavy. It was real. She looked at Cole, and for a moment the room lost its corners. Thank you, she said. Her voice went quiet at the end, not small, only careful. She took the dress to the back room and shut the door part way. Later, the square in town filled with a soft clatter. Founder's Day brought a strip of bunting from the mercantile and a string of jars with candles that made a wavering line around the edges. Fiddles found a tune and held it. Smoke from a barrel of roasting apples drifted and stuck in hair and cloth. Children ran and then ran again. Men talked about cows even when no one asked. Nora stepped into the light with Jessie on her hip and the green dress on her body. It did not hide anything. It carried what it touched. The seams showed under the lamplight like roads on a map, each one a choice to hold where it mattered. The boots she wore had taken the polish without shame. Alma saw her first and let out a pleased sound without words. She crossed the space between tables and looped a knitted scarf over Nora's shoulders, a soft blue that set the green to deeper life. "The night will turn on you," Alma said. "Take this." "Thank you," Nora said. Pike's mouth started to form a sentence that thought it was a joke. Sawyer pressed a flat hand to his shoulder and did not take his eyes off the dance circle. Pike shut his mouth and swallowed like a man who had remembered his own mother. Cole stood by the cider barrel and watched from a place where men come and go to fill a cup. His face did not change much. It softened at the edges like wood that had stopped fighting the knife. He kept his hands in his pockets and did not look away. A rancher from the other side of Redwater recognized the dress and did not bother to hide it. "That was Lydia's," he said too loud for the shape of the moment. Cole's eyes stayed on Nora. "It wears right now," he said. "It was not an argument." Nora swayed to the fiddle without stepping into the dance. Jessie pulled at the lace and laughed a laugh that made 3 people around her smile without knowing why. A woman at the pie table asked if the dress was new. Nora said it was mended. The woman said that was the same as new when done right. They shared a look that women share over dough and broken things. The night cooled. The scarf caught the last of the heat from Nora's neck and held it. Cole came near enough to ask if Jessie could hold a cup with both hands. He held it while the boy put his mouth to it and made happy noise. Their fingers brushed where cup met cup. They did not withdraw. On the ride home, the wagon wheels found every old rut and sang over them. The yard took them in. Nora carried Jessie inside and settled him where sleep would find him. On the porch, Cole set the brake and stood with the quiet that follows music. The lantern by the door swung a little. His shadow crossed hers and retreated without touching. They stood with nothing required. Nora felt the weight of the dress settle against her and then let it go. Cole took the hat from his head and did not put it back on. They did not need to say goodnight. The hinge did it for them. Frost came in early, bright and thin. By first light, the ground wore silver at the edges. The pumpkin vines in the kitchen patch went dark, as if a hand had passed over them. The air took the inside of the nose and made it sting. Nora folded the green dress smooth and laid it on the bed with her palms flat for a moment. She placed Jessie in a warm basket by the hearth, layered the quilt, and touched the soft hair one more time. She set the kettle where it could be found. She put the cup where it always sat. On the porch, the pair of boots Cole had left for her looked at the yard like dogs waiting for a call. She lifted her carpet bag and tightened the strap. She moved to the fence line where the cottonwoods stood without leaves. Her breath showed itself and then went to ground. Cole felt the absence before he saw it. The crib was empty. The kettle sat square. The room had that clear look it gets when a hand is finished with it. He stepped onto the porch and saw her at the edge of the field. He walked down the steps and across the yard. Frost broke under his boots in a clean, small sound. She did not turn when he reached her. She had that look of someone who has already put a thought into a box and closed it. He stopped with a space between them that felt like a mile and a foot. "I cooked," she said. "I cleaned, I mended, I held him when he burned, I wore the dress. You do not owe me anything." He heard the name he was to her when she was building a wall. Mr. Maddox had weight in it that Cole did not. He did not flinch, though the sound set something back to ringing under his ribs. He let his hands hang where she could see they were empty. "Was it only a part?" he asked. "A thing you play until the scene ends." "It was kindness," she said, "and survival, for you and for me." She picked up the bag. Her grip was firm but not hard. She did not look angry. She looked done. He reached and set 2 fingers on her wrist. Not a hold. A pause. She stopped and faced him full. The frost made her breath look like smoke. His own breath came and went in clouds he could not control. "If I asked you to marry me right now," he said, voice gone rough from sleep and cold, "would you think it was pity?" "No," she said, and the answer came without delay. Her eyes looked at his and did not slide away. "But if you do not ask, I will think you are afraid I mean it." The air thinned. Somewhere a crow made a black sound. The cottonwoods gave a small shiver where the wind touched them. Cole's hand left her wrist and found her hand. He curled his fingers around hers, slow as if learning a tool. Her hand met his and held warm in the cold. He closed his eyes for the space of one long breath. The frost under their boots crackled once and went quiet. The yard kept their shapes against the morning. Morning came clear and cold. The windows wore a thin film that faded as the stove took hold. Coffee lifted a dark steam. On the table beside Nora's cup lay a small gold ring that caught the light and held it. The board under it still showed yesterday's brown circle from Cole's cup, a pale halo inside the grain. Nora stood barefoot on the warm spot near the oven. She tightened her robe at the waist and rubbed her hands once to wake the feeling in her fingers. The ring sat plain as a coin on good wood. She looked at it and did not reach yet. The room smelled of coffee and soap and the last of the mesquite smoke from last night's fire. Jessie laughed in the front room, thin and sunny, the kind of sound that finds the corners and makes them change shape. She smiled without showing teeth and reached for her cup. She lifted it, drank, and set it back in the same wet place to make the circle a little darker. Cole came in with the boy on his hip. The child had both hands in his father's beard and seemed to be tuning it. Cole's boots were off. His socks had straw stuck to them like they had argued with the yard and lost. He saw the ring on the table and then looked at her face. The shadow that lived between his eyes thinned. "You did not say anything," he said. His voice stayed quiet, as if saying the wrong word could jar the cup and spill what mattered. "I did," she said. "You were not in the room." He let out a breath that had been stuck since the frost. He came closer, set Jessie in the high chair, and checked the latch as if it needed checking. He picked up the ring and turned it with his thumb and forefinger. His hands were scarred and careful. He went to one knee, not for tradition, for eye level, for balance. "I do not own fine words," he said. "I do not require them," she said. "Marry me," he said. She set her cup down and moved the plate aside so it would not rattle. She looked at his face, took the weight of the moment into her chest, and nodded once. "Yes," she said, "if you wash the dishes tonight." His mouth broke into a smile that changed him more than a shave would have. He put the ring on her finger and watched his big hands turn gentle. The band slid home like a known answer. It fit. He stood up and kissed her cheek, as if asking the house for permission. The house did not mind. Jessie banged a spoon against the tray. The spoon made a small tin clatter that sounded like approval. Cole laughed with the kind of light he had not owned for years. He lifted the child and kissed his hair. Nora set the skillet on the flame and cracked eggs into bacon fat. The sizzle said now. She moved in the small dance between stove and table and sink. The ring picked up a stripe of sun and threw it across her knuckles when she brushed her hair back. They ate without ceremony. Cole stood to take the plates. He carried them to the washpan like a man accepting terms with a good spirit. He rolled his sleeves and put his hands in the hot water. Nora moved aside and let him make his own map between soap and rinse and towel. He handled the plates like wire, slow, sure. He set them in the rack with space enough to dry. The day took on errands that felt like breathing. In the yard, Pike and Sawyer brought in a skittish bay and argued about the blame a gate deserves. They saw the ring on Nora's hand when she brought out a pail for the horse. Pike's eyes went wide, then thoughtful. He opened his mouth and then closed it. Sawyer touched the brim of his hat and said that the bay had poor manners and would learn better near a steady hand. Nora handed him the pail and walked back inside. Their talk moved past her without catching. Alma knocked at the back door with a jar of quince jam tied with twine. She saw the ring, smiled into Nora's face as if sharing a joke no one had to tell, and set the jar on the shelf. She left a small knitted potholder on the stove rail as if it had always belonged there. Her shawl held in the smell of wood smoke and winter sun. By noon, the day had warmed 2 degrees enough to soften the frost in the shade. Cole walked the west fence with wire ties in his pocket. He stopped at the corner post and pressed his palm to the wood. It stood plumb and quiet. The wire he and Nora had pulled the day before sang a low note when the wind touched it. He tightened one tie where the cold had shrunk it and then stood with his hands on his hips, satisfied with a thing that held. In the house, Nora took the green dress from its place and checked the seam she had worried with her fingers the night she wore it. The stitch sat strong. She ran her nail along it and felt how the ridge had softened. She folded the dress with clean care, laid it flat, and set a sprig of cedar on top to give it an honest smell. She pulled on her work dress and tied her apron, then bent over the crib to set the small bell in motion. The tap met her pulse and made a shared line. Afternoon laid itself across the ranch in long slats of light. Cole came in and stood out of the way of the table. He set his hat on the peg and carried a small box from the shed to the kitchen. He opened it on the table to show the tin box she had left him days before. The spool of blue thread had thinned from use. He had added a small knife and a stick of beeswax for the seam. He held up the saddle scrap he had practiced on and showed her the line he had been working. The stitches still leaned now and then, but they no longer wandered. "Better," he said, not asking, not boasting. "Better," she said. She took the scrap, felt the seam, then set it back in his hand like a held promise. They cooked chili and onions and set out a loaf that had kept its crust. Cole let Jesse crawl over his boots and tug at the leather laces. He put one finger into the child's fist to anchor him. When Jesse tried to pull the whiskers on his chin, Cole let him and only made a face that made the boy laugh so hard he fell back on his hands. The ring flashed when Nora wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. It caught each time she lifted the ladle and each time she set the spoon down. It did not need showing. It showed itself in work. She put bowls on the table and a folded towel under the pot to keep it from marking the wood. She sat and ate across from Cole in a simple piece that tasted like beans and chiles and thyme. Evening tightened outside. The temperature fell all at once the way it does in the high country. Cole brought in more wood and stacked it by the hearth. He set the small iron kettle near the coals to keep the air soft. He put his hand on Nora's shoulder when he passed a touch as natural as setting down a cup. She leaned her cheek into it without thinking and went on with her task. Later, after the dishes had been washed and set up to dry, they walked the porch with the boy between them. The boards remembered their weight. 2 sets of boot prints went down the steps and across the packed earth to the edge of the yard and back again. Their shapes were different, one large and straight, one smaller and new. Together they made a pattern the ground seemed pleased to hold. From the lane, Alma passed with a basket hooked over her arm. She lifted her hand and pointed her chin at the twin trails on the dirt. Her smile was small and full. She walked on without calling out. Inside, Jesse drifted off under a quilt that had seen more than one winter. The bell tapped twice at the turn and then went quiet. The stove clicked as its iron shifted. Cole set his chair near the crib and rested his forearm there, not to hold anything down, only to be weight in the room. Nora sat on the rug and mended a shirt cuff with the blue thread from the tin box. She bit the thread with her teeth and smoothed the seam with a thumb. "Hand me that," she said, and Cole passed the thimble without taking his eyes off the sleeping child. They did not talk much. When they did, it was about salt or weather, about when to bring in the last of the onions, about how the rooster had learned the wrong hour. Their words fit the room. Their quiet fit too. She finished the cuff and folded the shirt. He picked up the shirt and checked the seam with the softness he reserved for proof. He nodded once. She stood and put a hand on his shoulder as she went past. He caught her fingers and let them go. Night settled. The yard gave back the day with a breath and went still. Beyond the fence, a coyote called one time and gave up. In the kitchen, the coffee cup left a new ring on the table beside the old one. The gold band sat warm on Nora's hand where it met the lamplight. The house had a small, steady heart that did not need naming. The wind moved through the cottonwoods and made a sound like cloth being folded in a careful room. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.